The Law School Admission Council just added a field to the official LSAT score report called the Writing Ability Score. And it's blank right now, and there's nothing in there, but it is there now. And that should scare you just a little bit, because LSAC does not add fields to the score report for no reason. That field is there because they expect a number to go in it. And once you understand why, your LSAT timeline might need to change. I've been teaching the LSAT for over 20 years. I've watched LSAC signal changes before, and what they're signaling right now is not subtle. And nobody's talking about it, but I'm going to. Over a year ago, LSAC stated publicly on their website that LSAC writing would remain unscored in the short term, but that they are analyzing the writing for validity and reliability with a long-term goal of providing a scored writing assessment for admissions. Now, if you don't work in testing, that might sound like bureaucratic nothing. But validity and reliability are the two things a testing organization must prove before they can defensively score anything. They don't spend years studying those factors unless they're building toward a scored section. And look at what they've done since then. They've renamed the section. It's not called LSAT writing anymore. It's called LSAT argumentative writing. They redesigned the prompt. The old version was simple. You pick side or side B and you're done. But now you get multiple perspectives. 15 minutes to plan, 35 minutes to build an actual argument. They integrated writing into the test logistics. You literally cannot get your LSAT score released unless you have an approved writing sample on file. And now there is a placeholder on the score report for the score itself. Now, each one of those steps by itself individually means nothing, but all of them together is a roadmap that they're building towards something. And so the big question is, of course, when does this happen? Now, LSAC doesn't rush. They might be the most conservative testing organization in the country, but they also don't build roadmaps unless they intend to follow them. Now, new LSAT testing years begin each July, and so my prediction is they're going to start scoring the writing sample in July of 2027. So you've got about a year and change. Now, the version of the LSAT you take right now, no logic games, writing unscored, only 2 types of sections instead of 3, that is actually the simplest the LSAT has been in decades. Unfortunately, no, nothing good lasts forever, and there is an expiration date on this version of the test. Now, here is why I think this is happening now and not 5 years ago. It's because of artificial intelligence. Right now, admissions is reading personal statements that they know were probably written by ChatGPT or at least heavily rewritten by it. That also goes the same for addenda, YX school essays, diversity and adversity statements. And so there's nothing they can do about that, unfortunately. The horse has left the barn. So admissions is asking one very simple question. Does your writing ability under pressure match the writing in the rest of your file? The LSAT writing sample is the only place they can answer that. The browser is locked down. They've got proctoring software installed. Your webcam is on. Your screen is recorded. You can't switch tabs, can't copy paste from elsewhere. And so think about that. In an application full of writing that anybody could have helped with, this is the one sample where they know it's actually you. And because every single test taker gets the same format under the same conditions, it's easy for them to compare. And that gives law schools something they don't have anywhere else in the application. It's a credibility check, verification of your true ability. Now, of course, I do want to manage expectations here. A scored writing sample is not going to become another LSAT arms race. It will not be the thing that makes or breaks your application, but it will be a filter for consistency. Let's say you are a non-native English speaker. Your personal statement sounds polished and fluent, it's beautiful, it's amazing, but your proctored writing sample sounds like a completely different person. That gap is going to raise some questions, and those are not questions you want admissions to be asking. And it works the other way around too. If your writing sample is clearly strong and clearly written by you, it validates everything else in your file. Now, here is one distinction that matters. LSAC decides whether writing is scored, but law schools decide how much it actually matters. And at first, they're probably going to use it cautiously, just for context, just for one more data point. But context from a proctored and verified source is way more trustworthy than a polished personal statement that nobody can verify. Now, there's this question of whether you can actually score writing fairly at all, because the last major testing organization that tried this completely blew it. The College Board added a scored essay to the SAT in 2005. You had 2 separate graders, 3 different categories. Sounds reasonable. But it turned out the single strongest predictor of your score was just how long your essay was. Pretty easy to game that. You write more, you do better. How many words you could put on the page was the best predictor of how high you could score. Then 16 years later, the College Board killed it entirely because the rubric they used for scoring never measured what it was supposed to measure. So that's the cautionary tale, that's the precedent there, and LSAC has watched every minute of it. But here's what's different. They killed off the SAT essay back in 2021 before ChatGPT, before AI chatbots even existed, and the SAT essay died because colleges didn't want it, they didn't find it useful. But a scored LSAT essay might survive because law schools actually need it and they're pushing for it. And of course, they're not looking for Shakespearean prose here. They're looking for something much more specific. Can you take a position? Can you support it logically? Can you acknowledge the other side? Can you communicate clearly under time pressure? That's what lawyers do. In contrast, the SAT essay was asking you to analyze somebody else's argument. You weren't actually building anything. LSAT argumentative writing is the opposite. You are constructing your own case from scratch, and the rubric has to reflect that. Now, I would expect their rubric to evaluate argument construction, not just whether you have an opinion, but whether you can reason your way towards it. Now, how you handle the other side here matters as well. In legal reasoning, ignoring the best counter-argument will destroy your credibility. So I guarantee this rubric is going to reward engaging with opposition. Real engagement here, not a throwaway sentence. But here's what I think admissions will care about the most. Does it sound like a real person? Because they have spent years reading AI polished prose, every sentence perfect, but none of it human. Now, a proctored essay where someone is clearly thinking in real time, even if it's rougher or messier, that might be worth more than anything else in the file. They want the most real writing that is truly you. So here is your situation. Logic games are off the test for 1.5 years now. Writing is currently unscored, and so the LSAT is only testing you on 2 things right now: logical reasoning and reading comp. That is the fewest scored components this test has had in decades, maybe ever. Now, once scored writing arrives, likely coming in about a year, you're adding in something you can't cram for, because you can't build writing ability in a 6-week study plan. You've either developed that skill over years or you haven't. And even if LSAC rolls this out carefully, there will be hiccups. It's going to be messy. Transitions always are, right? Some students will over-prepare for the writing and neglect logical reasoning and reading comp, which are still worth far more. Others might ignore writing entirely and send in something sloppy. But you can avoid all of that by being done with the LSAT before it changes. Now, the part that should make you feel good is that law schools will not penalize you for which version of the LSAT you took. Same thing happened with logic games. Some people applied with an LSAT score that factored in logic games, some post-logic games being removed, and nobody cared. Your LSAT score is valid for 5 years under the rules that are currently in existence when you take the test. But don't rush it if you're not ready. If your scores are swinging all over the place, if you're still missing questions because you don't understand the arguments, if you're still building fundamentals, don't rush it. You've still got a year before any changes might go into effect. And the writing change does not outweigh a weak LSAT score, ever. A few points lower on the multiple choice will hurt you way more than avoiding the writing transition would save you. Now, moving up your timeline could make sense if your practice range is close to your goal, if you've got one area to refine and time to do it, and you can knock out the writing early enough that your score release isn't delayed, just take it. Sooner is smarter if you can get it done in time. But if not, you want to get your score right first. And if you're watching this a year from now, after scored writing is already live, you've got good news as well. If you can reason clearly under pressure, that's going to help you. Everybody's personal statements look pretty much the same now. Everybody's application reads like it was written by the same AI. But a proctored essay where you genuinely outperform, proctored under timed conditions, can't be faked, that's going to stand out. Score writing is going to hurt the people who are leaning the most on AI to carry their applications, but it helps those who can actually do the work. And if that's you, that might be the best thing that ever happened to your chances. Now, LSAC has told us what's coming. They put the placeholder for it on the score report, and the easiest version of the LSAT you will ever see is the one that exists right now, but it's not going to last. Strike while the iron's hot. If you're looking for help with your LSAT prep, I'm happy to help you out. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me personally is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That is an open offer literally for everybody watching this now or later. I'm setting aside the time to help you out. If you're studying for the LSAT, looking for some support, feel free to book that call. What we do during that tutoring lesson is we look at where you're currently scoring on the LSAT, if you're taking a practice test, what your goal score is, and how to get you to your goal on your time frame considering your other obligations. We've got some folks taking the LSAT in April in just a week. I don't like to promise overnight success, of course. I don't like to make outlandish claims. But if you're taking the LSAT in June or August or beyond, we've got plenty of time to get your score up. If you're taking it in June, roughly about 2 months away, we're going to take a more intensive boot camp style approach with live tutoring every other day or so. If you're taking it in August, we've got a bit more time. We can take a more slow and steady approach, which of course is preferable, all else being equal. The nice thing about going for the LSAT in June or August is that you can still apply when applications open in September. Applying earlier is better than applying later, all else being equal. When you apply earlier, it's a bit easier to get in, and there's also more scholarship money available. A lot of folks don't know this, but law schools operate on a rolling admissions basis, meaning they evaluate applications in the order in which they're received. And so when you apply at the tail end of the cycle, if you're applying now to start law school in roughly 4 to 5 months or so, it's going to be more of an uphill battle. But when you can apply in September to start law school roughly 1 year later, just like in anything else in life, you plan ahead, you do better, the odds are then in your favor. Now, I see some questions coming into the chat here. I will get to as many of those as I can. So just feel free to keep dropping them in. I'm monitoring the comments on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram and all of that. So drop them in wherever you're watching this. I see TikToker is asking, I'm taking the remote LSAT soon. I heard there were many people getting their score of 170 plus. How to avoid? Well, you don't want to avoid a 170 plus. Or I might not be understanding the question correctly here. I guess you're asking how to avoid dropping your score below 170. Feel free to elaborate on that one there. I'll try to answer this in the most useful way that I can here. I mean, how to avoid the competition, maybe? Well, when you're taking the LSAT remotely, for those who aren't aware, the LSAT is only available remotely in April and June of this year. Starting in August, they're going back to administering it only in person with rare exceptions because, for those who aren't aware, there's been a lot of cheating going on with the remote LSAT. A lot of organized cheating rings, hacking people's computers, proxy test takers and such. And so if you want to take the LSAT remotely, your last chance is in April or June. Knock it out then if you want, because starting in August, it's back to in-person only with rare exceptions for those who have medical accommodations or a geographic hardship getting there in person. I see a follow-up asking about how to avoid getting flagged with the remote LSAT. Best thing is follow the rules. Have your webcam line of vision clear, and so don't have anybody else in the background to take down the poster on your bedroom wall with contrapositive formulas on it. You want to basically make sure that you are following the rules to the letter. And so don't do anything sketch. Don't speak out loud. They don't like that. They're worried that you could be cheating in some way. So if you can have a fairly sterile environment when you're taking the LSAT remotely, then you minimize likelihood of issues. A lot of the folks with score holds are for remote LSAT when there is some sort of security breach or security question of some kind. And so if you can tell your roommates, significant others, your friends, your family, your pets, get them all out of the room for those 2.5 hours or so to make sure that you have a smooth testing experience. Also try to make sure that you have a pretty stable internet connection to avoid any connection issues, because that could also lead to problems. FizzGig says, this is the best law school tips page on TikTok. Awesome. Really glad that you're finding it helpful. By the way, folks, if you find this helpful, please spread the word. Share this to your socials, to your TikTok. Share this in any group chats, Discord, subreddits, Facebook groups. The only way these lives grow is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these, and the algorithm doesn't really boost lives for the TikTok because they can't run ads during them. And so if you could share this to your socials, it would mean the world to me. I see Jacob is asking, what's the best way to prepare for the writing portion of the LSAT? Well, given that the LSAT is currently, the writing sample is currently unscored, I would argue that until you've locked in a scored, an LSAT goal score at your top end on the multiple choice portions, I would actually not prepare for the writing portion. In other words, less time on the writing portion, more time on the scored multiple choice portions of logical reasoning and reading count, because time is limited and time is finite, meaning that any hour you spent on the writing is an hour less you're devoting to the scored portions of the LSAT, which is really what that you need to spend time on. Now, once you've hit your goal score on the official LSAT, you've locked that in, you can then, of course, switch gears and focus on the writing. The best thing to do is do a writing sample. Sit down, time yourself, 15 minutes planning, taking notes, 35 minutes actually writing the essay, then look it over, maybe have a tutor critique it for you, give you some pointers on how clean it is. Did you have a good paragraph breakdown of intro, paragraph, body, conclusion? Did you have a clear thesis statement? Did you acknowledge the other arguments in favor of the other side? If you've done that, you're probably pretty good. For most folks, if your grades in college and English were decent, if you're a native English speaker, you're probably going to be fine no matter what. Of course, if you're not in those categories, then maybe it's worth a bit more time devoting to the LSAT writing. But otherwise, I wouldn't spend time on it. I would focus only on the scored portions of the LSAT because that's what law schools really care about. I see Yahya is asking, what AI is best at the LSAT, if any, for explaining and solving problems? I would steer clear of the AI, honestly, for LSAT prep because most of these models are unreliable. They've gotten better and better, of course. They could get most LSAT questions right, but they will get a handful wrong, and you don't know which ones they're getting wrong. And you don't want to learn the LSAT from someone who themselves doesn't know it very well. And AI, unfortunately, I've consistently tested it on the hardest LSAT questions, and it gets them wrong a lot of the time. And of course, I could tell that, but if you're just a student studying for the LSAT, you may not be in a position to evaluate the reasoning, and AI is really good at sounding confident while still being wrong. So you want to tread carefully with that. And there's more actual LSAT resources available out there than ever before, available for free or low cost, whether it's my YouTube videos or on-demand courses, accessible explanations for every single LSAT question ever released. So there's no need to resort to the AI for this. Sprinkle asks, why do you teach negation? Well, I teach negation because it can be useful for certain LSAT question types. In particular, logical reasoning, necessary assumption questions. If you want to ask yourself what assumption needs to be the case in order for the argument to work, you can ask it in the negative by asking, well, if this were not the case, what would happen? And the correct answer choice, when negated, will destroy the argument. And so you ask yourself, does this need to be true? If not, what would happen? I'm not saying you have to go overboard with formal logic negating everything, of course, but it's a tool that is useful in some cases. Believe asks, why does law school have to be so expensive? Well, it doesn't have to be so expensive. And we know this because the cost of law school and the cost of tuition for higher education in general has risen much faster than inflation. It's risen because it can. They charge more because they're able to charge more. And they've been able to charge more because students have a virtually unlimited budget for law school tuition by borrowing money from the federal government. And so as Lolo's pointing out here, there is this new cap on graduate school loans, the elimination of the Grad Plus loans going into effect this year. And that's going to set a cap on this runaway growth in law school tuition and higher education tuition in general. Because by limiting how much folks can borrow, law school applicants and graduate students in general will finally be less willing to borrow unlimited amounts of money because they will have to resort to private loans to do so. And so therefore, that will kind of set a ceiling on what graduate schools can charge. And so we will see the cost of graduate school come down as a result is my prediction. Law schools will give more scholarship money. They will facilitate alternative ways of paying for law school. We already see Washington University, for example, partnering for private loans, which of course raises some questions there for sure. I've covered this at length on the YouTube channel in the past, but I think this will certainly set a cap on how much students effectively end up paying, and this may somewhat reduce the number of people going to law school. I don't know if this will reduce applications to the same extent, though, because people may still apply and then learn later how much it'll actually cost and then decide whether to actually go forward with matriculating or attending law school. David's asking, is it wise to study for the LSAT as a high school senior? I think it's unnecessary. As FizzGig says, it's too soon, live your life. As a high school senior, I would first get into undergrad, just get into college, take the SAT if you need to first, start college, maintain a good GPA, explore whether law school is really what you want to do, and then come back to the LSAT in a year or two. The LSAT's not going anywhere, law school's not going anywhere, and your score is good for 5 years. It's not good for 6 years, though, and you might want to take a gap year. Who knows, right, between undergrad and law school. So I don't think you need to start this early. But yeah, doing an internship at a law firm is a great idea to explore whether law school is what you really want to do. Mir's asking, are you saying it's too late now for the fall? Not in every single case. I mean, you could take the April LSAT and start law school this fall. In some cases, you could take the June LSAT and start law school this fall, but you are going to start running into deadlines, and it's going to be a little bit harder to get in. So you could apply and see what happens, but for the best admissions chances and for the most scholarship money, I would say better to apply in September to start law school in fall 2027. I see a couple questions here from Braden Lolo asking about expectations for the upcoming admissions cycle. Will it be as bad or even worse or less competitive? What do I think will happen? Well, I think it's ultimately a question of the job market and the economy. When the job market is bad for recent graduates, when the economy is bad, folks tend to go to graduate school more. And we're in this kind of hazy situation right now where the unemployment rate for folks with recent BAs is actually pretty bad. I was looking at some stats earlier. It was like over 5% for recent college graduates, which is unusually high. I'll have more to say about this tomorrow. I'm going to dig into the stats a little bit later today. But the bottom line is that I do think that things will continue to be competitive because people will keep going to law school to wait out a bad job market, basically. When your alternatives are not great, you think to yourself, well, I'll just go to law school, kill some time, come out in 3 years with a more employable degree of a JD. I see Andre's asking, do you think I can reach the 170s in 5 months if I'm currently at a 155? It's certainly possible. I mean, 5 months is plenty of time. I'm guessing you're going for the September LSAT maybe. I mean, to improve 15 points in 5 months or 20 points in 5 months is very doable. I mean, your improvement's ultimately a function of the amount that you study and the way in which you study. And so you're allowing the time. The next question is, what is the way in which you are going to study? If we change the variables, we change the equation, right? So have you just been self-studying with textbooks and videos and my YouTube stuff, for example, or are you getting proper support with courses and coaching, personal feedback on what you're getting wrong and why? And because I know the power of coaching, the power of getting personal support, I'm happy to help you out. I mean, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. That's an open offer for everyone now or later. Again, it's unpluggedprep.com/start. I see a coach is asking, I'm taking the April LSAT, so I'm very nervous. Totally hear you on that. This is not the time to burn the candle at both ends. You want to go in feeling fresh. And so my advice in the final week is mainly to slow it down a little bit, maybe take a couple more practice tests, review them in depth. That's all you've got to do. Cramming does not work on the LSAT because it's not a test of memorization. It's a test of pattern recognition. And so you're building the skills over time. If you don't feel like you've put in enough time up to this point, you might want to consider going for the June LSAT or August as a backup. That way it's not all stressing about, you're not all riding on this one LSAT test date. Because while the LSAT as a whole is incredibly important, no one particular LSAT test date is going to make or break you. You can always retake. And if you're applying this fall April's early. You've still got June as a backup. You've still got August as a backup. So don't feel like it's all riding on April in particular. I see some folks in the chat talking about LSAT prep books, and one of them's talking about Logic Games book. So Logic Games have been off the test for almost 2 years now. And so one of the problems with these LSAT textbooks is that they're often outdated. Don't use an LSAT book with Logic Games in the title when Logic Games are off the test for almost 2 years now. You want to study for the version of the test that you're actually going to be taking. And the LSAT's undergone lots of LSAT changes in the past 5 or 6 years or so. It went from being on paper to on a tablet to on a computer. They cut it from 5 sections to 3 sections for the temporary LSAT Flex format. Then they added 4 sections. Then they swapped Logic Games for a second logical reasoning section. And so please, please, please don't use these hand-me-down textbooks from your older siblings or frat or sorority brothers or sisters or whatever. It's not a good use of your time. You're saving $30 on a prep book, but you're spending hundreds of hours studying for a version of the test that no longer exists. So don't use these old books. Study online. The LSAT is now online, of course. And when there are changes to the LSAT, we can update things pretty quickly with a couple of clicks versus having to do a whole new print run, and then you have all these old used copies of old books floating around. I see Syed's asking, or Sid's asking, do you recommend score preview, or is it better for law schools to see your improvement? The truth is that it doesn't really matter, because law schools only take your highest score on record into account. They do not average multiple LSAT scores. And so in my view, score preview is both a function of the outdated cancellation option. Canceling your LSAT score made sense 20 years ago, back when law schools did average multiple LSAT scores, so there'd actually be a reason to want to hide a bad score and remove a bad score. But now that they only take the highest score on record, whether you have a cancellation or a low score doesn't matter. If you canceled it, they're going to assume it probably didn't go very well, because if it had gone well, you would have kept it, right? So truth is, do whatever makes you feel better. If you want to spend the $45 or $75 for score preview, depending on when you purchase it, if it'll reduce your stress, then by all means go for it. But it's also a way for LSAC to get some more money and fees in their bank accounts. Lolo's asking, do you think the time constraint of the LSAT is the hardest part of the exam, or is it the content? Both, and they're somewhat related, right? I mean, part of it is the content itself. If you had a limited time, you would do a lot better than if you had limited time, but you're still not getting a perfect 180 in most cases. Accuracy has its difficulties, and then pacing has its difficulties as well. So in other words, they both play a role in leveling up the difficulty of the exam, and that's one reason why when folks get extra time on the LSAT, they score something like 5 points higher than non-accommodated test takers, but they don't do perfect. So ultimately, how does this play out for you? You want to study each part in isolation, just in a more practical sense, what will actually get your score up. Do untimed work to get the accuracy element down, then do pacing work to speed up. So at LSAT Unplugged, what we do for our students is we break LSAT prep into 5 major phases using the LASER approach. LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. The way it works is we focus on learning and accuracy. Learning is the foundational material, learning the different sections, the different question types. A is for accuracy, drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. So that's working on accuracy and understanding. Then you have S for individual sections, working on your pacing and your time management. This is the speed component, learning how to allocate your time so you're not running out of time and you could solve all 25 or so questions in roughly 35 minutes. Knowing when to flag and skip so that you avoid getting bogged down and getting stuck so you can circle back later to tough questions. Then you have E for exams and endurance, because in addition to accuracy and timing, you also have endurance, meaning you don't want to get fatigued and have your accuracy drop on the final section just because it is the final section. So I saw the question was about accuracy and timing, but fatigue and endurance also plays a role. Then you have review, R for review, using the Socratic review method, analyzing what you're getting wrong and why. So the 5 phases again of the LASER approach: learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. If any one of these is lacking in your study plan, your score will not be as high as it otherwise could have been. And so if you want to talk through what your study plan could look like, making sure that you are properly incorporating all phases of LSAT prep, learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review for laser, you could book the free tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. I'm happy to help you out. I see Simply Creasy's asking about when they administer the unscored final section. So the unscored experimental section could be any one of the scored portions of the LSAT, any one of the 4 sections. They don't tell you which one it is during, because if you knew, you wouldn't give it your full effort, right? Why would you care if you knew it wasn't going to be scored? They mix it in randomly, and they don't tell you which section is the extra one so that you will give it your full effort, because they want to use you as an unpaid guinea pig. Actually, you are the one paying to be their guinea pig to take the exam to help them test out future questions. And so you're not going to know during, you'll find out later. But that doesn't count. You don't know during the exam, so that you'll give it your full effort. And so that's part of why when you want to simulate your practice tests, you want to mix in an extra section anywhere within those 4 that you're taking under timed conditions. And I see TikTokers asking where to do practice tests. You can do them on the LSAC Law Hub platform. You get 4 practice tests on there for free. And LSAC has actually mixed in unscored sections into those practice tests to help you better simulate test day and what it's going to be like. So create a free Law Hub account, and you'll be able to do a practice test in there. I see Sid is asking, I have accommodations. Can they take that into account when looking at my score? So actually, no, they cannot. As the result of a lawsuit, when you take an LSAT with accommodations for extra time or extra breaks or what have you, there is no asterisk attached to your score, meaning that law schools will not know whether you took the LSAT with extra time or did not take it with extra time. The score looks the same to them. All they see is your score out of 180. So you're not penalized. There's no red flag on your score report telling them that you had more time than others. Andre's asking, any general ways to improve logical reasoning? I always do better with reading comp sections, and I struggle with logical reasoning. So logical reasoning is 2/3 of the test, so it's definitely worth giving yourself some extra time devoted in your study plan to logical reasoning. And the good news is that any gains you make in your understanding of logical reasoning will be doubled across the 2 sections. Now, there are roughly 15 different types of logical reasoning questions. You've got strengthen, weaken, flaw, necessary assumption, sufficient assumption, and so on. And so some types of logical reasoning are more common than others. The 3 most common types are necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. I would start there. And because you're going to get more of a return on your time invested on those types than the rare types like parallel and evaluate the argument that hardly ever come up. And everybody hates parallel reasoning because it's lengthier, more time consuming, longer questions, but it's a lot less common, so I wouldn't start there. I start with the more common types. Again, those are necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. Begin your prep on those, start there. You could watch my course lesson videos on those. You could get private coaching on those. I have plenty of videos on the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel covering those as well. I see Chrissy's asking, how do I get accommodations for test anxiety? Sid says, gotta be well documented with proof of already made university ones. And so having a precedent, having prior documentation of accommodations in the past will definitely help. But LSAC has actually gotten a lot easier about granting accommodations in recent years. And so it's easier to get accommodations than it would have been years back. All you need is a note from a qualified professional like a doctor or a psychiatrist, or even a primary care physician could be sufficient. And you just have them write some documentation explaining your condition, like test anxiety or ADHD or migraines or whatever the case may be. And then you write a statement of need saying what you are looking for and why you want it. You could get time and a half. You could get double time. You could get unlimited stop-start breaks. And if you have the documentation, you will probably get what you ask for. LSAC has become a lot more liberal in giving these out, and they now approve about 98% of requests for accommodations. And so as long as you get in before the deadline and you cross all your T's and dot all your I's, you're probably going to get what you ask for. I see TikToker says, I saw that 40% of Stanford Law School students have accommodations. How do people at top law schools in the country have such a high percentage of accommodations? It's kind of sus. Yeah, it kind of is, honestly. I think that LSAC has gone from denying people who deserved them to granting them to some people who do not deserve them. And I think it's wrong because it honestly casts suspicion on and doubt on people who rightfully deserve them. But I think they're basically afraid of getting sued because they've gotten sued several times over the years from when they were too strict, and now they've become too liberal about giving them out. And it's kind of undermining the predictive validity of the LSAT, but I don't see any solutions coming along anytime soon, unfortunately. It's possible the federal government may crack down on this. We'll see what happens, but I think the government's got bigger fish to fry right now. They're kind of more concerned about continuing practice of affirmative action these days. So there's some lawsuits pending about that right now in the medical school context, and law schools are scared about that as well because they know they're next in the firing line. I see Chrissy's asking, I've been studying for a while, went from 128 to 134, which isn't good, but I take my first LSAT next week. Should I still take it or should I postpone? I'll say it this way. I never recommend taking the LSAT if you're not scoring at or above your goal score, because your score is not magically going to jump up 10, 20 points on test day. If anything, a lot of folks' scores drop 5 to 8 points from their practice test to the actual because the real thing's more stressful and more can go wrong. Bad proctor, tech issue, nerves and anxiety, what have you. And so if you're at a 134 right now, I don't see a reason to go ahead and take it because you probably wouldn't want to apply to law school with a 134, right? I would say withdraw from it, take it at a later date. That way it's not counting against your retake limits, and law schools will never know that you were signed up for it in the first place. You could still take it in June or August and apply when applications open in the fall. And I know that nobody ever wants to wait, but taking the long-term view is going to serve you better in the long term to get you into a law school worth attending. And I see Stars is asking, isn't the scholarship contingent on maintaining a certain grade? Yes, so when it comes to law school, you have conditional scholarships and unconditional scholarships. Conditional scholarships require you to maintain a certain grade point average, and I would never go for one of those because law schools are kind of sketchy about this sort of thing, unfortunately, because they grant a scholarship to more people than could reasonably maintain that scholarship. And so they'll say, for example, just to put some numbers on this, they'll offer half the class a conditional scholarship saying that if you're in the top third, you'll maintain your scholarship, otherwise you lose it. But the thing is that it's mathematically impossible for half of students to be in the top third, right? 17% of them are going to lose the scholarship, and nobody thinks they're going to be that 17%. Most people don't even know how many got offered the scholarship in the first place. And so it's a bit of a sketchy game they're playing. And of course, you never know if something personal is going to happen to you, like a medical issue or a family issue. And law school is harder than you might think it's going to be. So I would say fight hard, negotiate for the unconditional scholarship that you'll maintain no matter what. I see June is asking, do you also submit how many times you take the LSAT, and does this affect which school accepts you? So on your LSAT score report, it's going to show how many times you took the LSAT and whether you canceled it or what your scores were if you kept the scores. But ultimately, law schools don't really have any reason to care how many times you took the LSAT because they're not evaluated based on that metric. They're only evaluated based on the highest LSAT score of their students. And so ultimately what matters is what's the highest score on your record. They have no reason to care how many times you took it. 8558 is asking, I have a 170, I want a 180 so I can get into a better school with scholarships. I mean, a 170 is a great score, but there also are valid reasons to retake a 170 because if you want to go to a top 14 law school, their medians are actually higher than that in most cases. The top 14 law schools all have LSAT medians of 170 to 174 or so. And so 170 might actually be on the low end if you're going to a T14. And for some other schools as well, getting a 175 plus or a 180 will get you into better law schools and get you more scholarship money. If you really want to push for the full ride, a 180 or 175 plus is going to help a lot. I see TikTokers asking, is a Rhodes finalist a T1, T2, T3 soft? It's a pretty strong soft. I mean, not as strong as having an actual Rhodes scholarship and getting the award, but certainly worth highlighting on your resume, perhaps talking a bit about that. But I wouldn't want you to over-index on the softs because they're soft. The hard numbers are really what matter a lot more. I would think a lot more about, can you get a higher LSAT score? If you're still an undergrad, can you get a higher GPA? And the thing is, for most folks watching this, I suspect that the GPA is probably pretty fixed at this stage, but the LSAT score, there is a lot you could do to raise that up by retaking. It's funny how a single day, 2.5 hours, could weigh more heavily than your entire undergrad combined, but that's just the nature of the game. So my thought is, let's get your LSAT score up. And for those of you who haven't yet booked it, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me. The link to book it is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. Happy to meet with you personally and help you map out your action plan to get your LSAT score up from your current starting point to whenever you're taking it. Why Losser's asking, I have few extracurriculars. Will this affect my application drastically? My GPA is a 3.8. So your GPA is pretty solid. It's almost as high as it could be. Law schools don't care that much about your extracurriculars. For law school admissions, unlike undergrad admissions, it's primarily your LSAT and your GPA. Other stuff doesn't matter nearly as much. And so rather than stressing about your lack of extracurriculars, I would just focus more on either raising your GPA if you're still an undergrad, or if you're done with that, focusing on the LSAT, because that's the biggest missing piece of the puzzle, and it's really the most important piece of the puzzle. Of course, if you're still an undergrad, you want to maintain a high GPA, and I see Officer Nubbs is asking about this. Is criminal justice or psychology BA better for pre-law, aka which is easier on your GPA? I would suspect criminal justice is going to be easier on your GPA than psychology. My broad understanding here is that anything at all STEM related will be a more rigorous major, meaning it's going to be more likely to be graded on a curve and be more rough on your GPA. In contrast, anything humanities, like English or criminal justice, for example, will be a bit easier on your GPA because it'll be easier to get those easy A classes. And so all else being equal, I will go for the criminal justice if law school was your #1 goal. If you want to focus on employability post-graduation with simply a BA alone, then other factors come into play. But if you were only going for pre-law in particular and applying to law school, then your #1 focus would then be maintaining the highest GPA possible. I see Greg is asking, do you think it's fine while doing my prep tests that after each question I have answered, I look at the right answer for that question? So this is a habit that a lot of students have. I understand it myself, but you do want to break that habit sooner rather than later, because on test day itself, you're not going to be able to check the answer after every single question. This is one of the problems that we have with students who come to us after having taken courses where they're drilling questions and doing nothing but drilling questions. But the thing is that test day is not a drill. It's not enough to get the questions right. You got to get them right under test day conditions, considering your pacing, your time management, your endurance. And so we got to build up your stamina and your focus to do full sets of 35 minutes, single sections, and then only checking your answers after you complete the section. And then you got to build up your endurance to do 4 sections in one sitting, 2.5 hours, with only a single break of 10 minutes between sections 2 and 3. Because on test day, you're not going to be able to see the answer until you've done the entire thing. You're really going to be waiting 2 to 3 weeks anyway, right? But at least get up to the point where you can do practice tests and not check for the full couple hours. Because that instant feedback will kill you. The fear and pain of not knowing is going to kill you, and you got to get used to not having the experience of knowing right away. And so when we build study plans for our students, we go from drilling questions by type to doing individual timed sections to doing full-length exams in the lead up to test day. And if your study plan does not include individual sections or full-length exams, you got to start building that into your plan sooner rather than later, especially if you're taking the LSAT this year, especially if you're taking it in April or June or August. And if you don't have a study plan, if you're just drilling questions or taking practice tests, you got to build through all 5 phases of that laser approach: learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and reviews. And if you want my help building out your study plan, You can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. I'll see you all then. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care. Thanks for joining.